Hi, everyone. Welcome to our first class. And so this is our first class on the human microbiome through the lifespan. This series, we're going to be focusing a lot about the microbiome. We're going to start the series with Dr. Katrina Whiteson and then follow up next month with Dr. Sanaz Demiri, and she's going to follow up with some herbs that kind of supplement or re-enhance or reinforce what we're going to be talking about today too. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Whiteson, and she's going to give you a little background about herself and then introduce you to the amazing world of the human microbiome.
Great. Well, thank you very much. This is such a interesting opportunity to work with the Susan Samueli Integrative Health Center and to get to visit this beautiful kitchen where Chef Jess is working. I'm Katrina Whiteson. I'm a professor in the molecular biology and biochemistry department, and I'm also the co-director and founder of our microbiome center here on campus. And I'm excited to tell you a little bit about our research. My lab studies the microbiome in the context of health and disease. And actually studying the microbiome has even opened up a lot of almost philosophical questions about what it means to be healthy and what is a normal healthy microbiome at different parts of our life is an active area of research that I'm looking forward to sharing more with you about today. So you can see the images I chose for my cover slide include a baby being colonized in the beginning of life, which is a really important moment for immune health and health in general. And then also I have an image of the microbiome as our lives progress, and you can see that there are really important changes in our microbiomes as we age that are central to our health. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we know about the microbiome and just some of the things that we've learned in the last 10 or 20 years. I want to start with an acknowledgement of my lab. Here's our group visiting Catalina Island last fall. And so I have a really wonderful group with postdocs and PhD students and students from UC Irvine who have done a lot of the work that I'm going to talk about today. We've also had some opportunities to work on diet and microbiome, which is really relevant for this session. So in a future session, I'm going to tell you about a class that we ran where we had students eat a high fiber diet for 2 weeks, and we studied their fecal microbiomes before and afterwards. And here's a couple of publications we wrote, both with a focus on the science and the education aspects of the outcomes from this project. And here's the series that we plan that Chef Jess mentioned. This is all up on the website, so you can find the information again, but I just wanted to highlight, we had a lot of fun putting together these topics and thinking through what aspects of diet and macronutrients would be helpful to learn about in terms of how we can use diet to promote a healthy microbiome. So today you're going to learn about how to make easy frozen kefir bark with Chef Jess, and these recipes were all provided to the participants. And here's the next recipe, which is a lentil soup recipe. And so I'm really looking forward to getting to see this in action just after my presentation. And here's the lentil soup recipe, which again was sent out to everybody who registered. Okay, here's my first science slide. And I want you guys to have a look at these two side-by-side plots showing you the second half of the 20th century. So in the first plot on the left in part A, you see this big decline in the incidence of infectious diseases. So due to sanitation and vaccination and other important public health measures, we saw this amazing increase in lifespan during the 20th century, a lot of it due to the decrease in infectious disease. But during that same time period, and these trends are really continuing, we see big increases in the incidence of immune disorders. So that includes autoimmune diseases like type 1 diabetes and multiple sclerosis. And the more we learn, I think there are more conditions that belong on this chart. For example, some kinds of cancer, even Alzheimer's disease, really could belong on this chart. And it's actually good news because it means that we have some control over the occurrence of these illnesses. So with diet and lifestyle changes, we can protect ourselves from some of these diseases. We're still learning about how. I mean, some of these diseases like type 1 diabetes, really, it's not, we don't know how to fix that yet. But I think there's room for us to understand microbiome and immune development in a way that will protect us in the future. So a big part of why this incidence has changed is because of our exposure to microbes. And if you're interested in this area, I can really recommend Marty Blazer's book. He's one of the fathers of the hygiene hypothesis. And in this book, you can learn things such as how an average American child before their 18th birthday is getting 18 courses of antibiotics. So often for ear infections and other normal childhood illnesses. And this is really changing our exposure to microbes, and it's changing our immune development. So before I get too far, I want to stop and define what I mean by a microbiome. So a microbiome is a collection or a community of bacteria, viruses, fungi, and other microbes that are living in a particular environment. So you have a different community of microbes living in the more moist skin on your elbow than you do on the front of your arm, and certainly in your gut, which has almost no oxygen. And so the microbes that live there are often anaerobes, or bugs that can't tolerate oxygen. In the last 10 or 20 years, we've had a lot of advances in our technologies that have given us a huge onslaught of wonderful data that help us understand how the composition of microbiomes correlates with a lot of different health conditions. So we now know what kinds of gut microbiomes are common in people with a long list of conditions, including obesity, cancer. We even know that vaccine efficacy is modulated by our microbiome composition and by our dietary fiber intake. There's an important gut-brain axis that's becoming better understood. And so it's been a very fun time to be a microbiome scientist, but I do want to point out that we have a lot of challenges to understand what the mechanisms underneath all these correlations are. So I hope if I'm giving this talk again in 10 years, that I have a lot more to say about this, because there's a lot of very interesting research projects getting at the correlations so we understand why the microbiome has these correlations with the conditions I've listed here. For example, we know that there are important links between processed food consumption and brain health. And so there's a lot of reasons we already know to improve our diets, but I want to point out this interesting article highlighting research showing that eating processed food is associated with decreased brain health. And you might ask, well, what is the link exactly? But I mean, just think of your gut microbiome as an organ that's full of microbes that can process almost every molecule. And so as a result, when you're eating or exposed to anything that comes through your digestive tract, all of those molecules are processed in your gut and go back out to your blood. So our brains are constantly being exposed to the metabolic products of our microbiomes. Cancer is another area where we have a lot of emerging knowledge about the associations between cancer and the microbiome. We know that certain microbiomes are associated with different kinds of cancer development. We know that tumors themselves often have a microbiome, which could be important as biomarkers for the cancer, and also for understanding how to improve treatment. We know that gut microbiome composition is very important for cancer treatment success, especially immunotherapy. And also to recover from cancer treatment, we know that microbiome and dietary and lifestyle choices have a big impact on our recovery. So there's for example, if I could look at any two people who are participating in this webinar, I would be able to find that most genetic differences between any two people are actually encoded in our microbial communities. That's even true for identical twins. So our human genomes have a lot more in common than all of the different microbes with all of their different microbial metabolisms that are living in our guts. So we each have a unique and persistent human microbiome that begins to develop early in our lives and sticks with us throughout our lives. Some of the most dense microbial communities on the planet live on the human body. And here's this plot I'm showing you where the y-axis is the density of microbes, and you can see the colon has one of the most dense microbial communities on the planet, even more so than soil, which is famous for being, teeming with microbes. I also want to point out that there are viral particles, sometimes 10 times as many, infecting each of those bacteria. And there's a lot of different unique metabolites emerging from the complexity of microbial metabolisms that are possible. And so that leads me to just this final conclusion, which is that disease might arise from a disturbed microbial community. So it's not just about infections when it comes to looking at the microbes that are associated with our bodies. Having a healthy balance of the microbiome is associated with all these conditions, and amazingly, it's still an important research question, even understanding what a healthy microbiome is. The saliva microbiome is also sometimes less studied and overlooked, but we have a really important community of microbes living in our mouths. They are very diverse and sometimes dominated by Streptococcus. They're very unique to each person. And within a household or within a family, we find a lot of common features in the microbes that are living in our mouths. So for each person, we have, say, 23,000 or so unique human genes, and then many orders of magnitude more diversity coming from the microbial genes. And as I mentioned earlier, there's maybe 500,000 different molecules that we could capture in a blood sample from any person, and about half of them are produced or modified by microbes. A lot of times these are dietary compounds that are being modified by our microbes. So it's very motivating to eat well and to give our microbes the fuel that they prefer, which is plant fibers, really. And that's going to be a focus of this series we have this year. Another big part of how each person has a unique microbiome is that for every one of those bacterial cells, there's often several bacterial viruses infecting them. And they have these interesting evolutionary arms races. And as a result, there's unique evolution arising in each person. And it's just, there's so much to learn. I hope this comes across inspiring because we have barely scratched the tip of the iceberg when it comes to studying microbiomes. And so even today, when we get a new data set back, it's often the case that many of the microbes in our data sets have never been seen before. So we've even been writing papers about ways to make sure that you don't overlook the less studied microbes, especially if your samples come from a part of the world that haven't been studied as well. So as I'm saying, I just really want this to be inspiring. You know, sometimes science is viewed as a big list of facts that you have to memorize, but there's really a lot to discover, and the microbiome is really a center of that. So for example, we often hear particle physicists talking about dark matter and how there's so much that we haven't discovered yet. And I think we can use that same terminology for the gut, and we have every right to do that. In terms of just what's hard to explain, I mean, even when we do population level studies of gut microbiome variation, in this study, they had about 5,000 people. And a lot of the variance cannot be attributed to any of the things we know how to measure about a person's health. However, some of the most important factors include age, they include medications that people are taking, and they include lifestyle and diet. So this is motivating that we have some control over promoting a healthy microbiome with our lifestyles. When we look around the world, we see really interesting patterns emerging. This is one of my favorite studies where they looked at people starting, you know, in their infancy and through the years. So the x-axis of this plot starts with babies and ends with people at 86. And the different colors represent different parts of the world. So in red, you have people from Malawi, in green are Indians from Venezuela, and in blue, you have people from the US. And you'll notice that the gut microbiome diversity of the people in the blue dots from the US stop at a lower number than the people from Africa and Venezuela. So in the US, we actually have lower gut microbial diversity on average. And this trend has been repeated as we've done further studies around the world. We find that people in the industrialized world eating more processed foods and having, you know, many factors that are reducing gut microbial diversity, we see that they cluster together. So here's an interesting plot with samples from all around the world. And you see that the people from the more industrialized parts of the world are clustering together, whereas the people who are eating more plant-based diets and having less industrialized lifestyles, their microbiomes cluster together. And the patterns that are emerging from this are fascinating, and I'm happy to discuss this further throughout our series this year. Here's one of my favorite examples. This is a study where they followed people immigrating to the US from Thailand, and they found that with every 5 years that people spent in the US, they lost some of their Prevotella, which are a bacteria that are really good at breaking down plant fibers. It's one of the gut anaerobes that are often associated with health. And you can see that they are losing those microbes with every 5 years that they spend in the United States. And that brings me to sharing this interesting story about an organization called the Global Microbiome Conservancy. This is an organization that is aiming to save the microbes of humanity for posterity. If you've ever heard of the seed bank up in Svalbard, saving plant seeds, this is an effort to keep the microbes of humanity safe. As our climate and our lifestyles are changing, we want to be able to look back and find those microbes in case we want to be able to restore them, for example. Okay, so this brings me to a story about early life microbiome development. So we know that breastfeeding has enormous impact on the early life gut microbiome. And it's a really amazing example of coevolution because it turns out that about 15% of the energy in breast milk is in the form of sugars, or you could even think of them as fibers. They're called human milk oligosaccharides that are specific to a certain kind of bifidobacterium that can break them down. It turns out that many infants in the US and around the world are exposed to antibiotics during childbirth and early life. And in general, many of the exposures in the last few generations, the same exposures that are protecting us from infectious disease, which obviously is a very good thing. But some of our lifestyle changes have really prevented us from being colonized by this bifido that can break down the breast milk sugar. Now, that's a really sensitive moment in human development. Clearly, if we're putting 15% of the energy in breast milk into a substance that only the bifidobacterium can break down and would otherwise just go right through the digestive tract and have no impact on our metabolism, that suggests that that relationship with the bifidobacterium is really important. But it turns out that bifidobacterium levels in the infant gut are declining in many parts of the world. So on this plot here, you can see the bright blue bifido is quite abundant in Bangladesh and Gambia. But when you look at other parts of the world, in Europe and in the United States, you see that it's really almost gone. So that's a relationship that's really changing in the modern world. For example, we did a study at the Children's Hospital of Orange County a few years ago, and bifido is in purple, and you'll see it's almost entirely absent from this data set of preterm babies at the NICU at the Children's Hospital in Orange County. In fact, we were finding blooms of bacteria that are considered pathogens. So that's really rough. If you're a preterm baby, that's a moment where you really need a healthy gut microbiome to help protect you from infection and provide a lot of the other functions that a healthy gut microbiome can provide you with. There's an interesting outcome of this story, though. There's scientists up at UC Davis who have actually developed a probiotic from this bifido that can break down the breast milk sugars. And to me, it brings up a lot of questions that, again, are almost philosophical, like, do we want to recolonize humanity with this healthy bifido? I can see a lot of positives, and this is something I'd be happy to discuss further, but I want you to know about this, that there is an effort to provide this bifido, and so far there have been really profoundly positive impacts, for example, in preterm infants who are protected from infection and other diseases when they have access to this probiotic. So here's that same probiotic I'm showing you. It's in bright blue. It's in the dark bright blue that's at the bottom of the plot. And you can see that it's actually becoming quite abundant, both in babies that have a C-section and babies that don't in this particular plot. So providing this bifido to breastfed babies allows the bifido to really dominate in the guts of those babies, which is exactly what you see in the parts of the world like Bangladesh and the Gambia, where babies have access to the bifido and are breastfed. So just to summarize a bit about the microbiome through the lifespan, we see that there are rapid changes from infancy to age 3. You saw that in my plot about the microbiomes from Amerindia, Malawi, and the United States. And then we see some stability in adulthood once people start eating solid foods. But then we actually see that lower gut microbial diversity often emerges later in adulthood, especially when access to whole foods is limited. So for example, studies of people who live in nursing home facilities where they aren't eating as many plant-based foods have found that their gut microbial diversity is especially low in those contexts. We also know that lean and physically active older adults who eat a good diet are able to maintain a higher gut microbial diversity and have some resilience to infection as a result. Another really interesting indicator of microbiome health is having distinct microbiomes in different parts of our body. So saliva microbiomes should be very different from gut microbiomes in a healthy person. But when we do studies of where we compare saliva and gut microbiomes, sometimes we see more overlap in the context of colon cancer or inflammatory bowel diseases, or even in COVID. So I'm showing you this plot here, which is showing COVID patients. The throat swab samples are in the left of the plot and the fecal samples are on the right. And you can see there's a lot more blurring in the top purple part of the plot. Those are intubated COVID patients in the hospital, whereas the healthy people, they don't have overlap between their fecal and their throat samples. So that's another sign of health, since that was the goal of today's lecture, to explain a little bit about what we know about healthy microbiomes. Well, we know that they should be distinct in different body cavities. So I'm going to leave you with these ideas about how we can manipulate the microbiome. So what tools do we have? There's probiotics and prebiotics. Probiotics being, they could be in the form of fermented foods, or they could be in the form of commercial probiotics. Many of the commercial probiotics that are currently available are not tested or validated for the claims that they make, even though it's a $60 billion industry. So that is an area that is in desperate need of research, but has promise for sure. Prebiotics like fiber are the nutrients that our microbes are really craving to have in our colon. And so that is going to be a big topic of the next several series, and is the goal of learning about how to make lentil soup today, for example. Other tools for manipulating microbiomes include fecal microbial transplants, fecal transplants, maybe you've heard of them before, and also phage therapy. So using bacterial viruses as alternatives to antibiotics, like the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And that's actually an active area of research in my lab. As I mentioned, probiotics are usually transient. So you eat a probiotic, but that doesn't mean that it becomes a resident member of your gut microbial community. And you wouldn't necessarily want that, by the way, but it's important to understand what's happening. If you do buy and eat probiotics, they won't always have positive consequences. And again, we'll bring that up in future sessions. But something that is just, I think, really overlooked, and something I hope you take home from today, is that there's a huge fiber gap in the United States. So we need about 20 to 40 grams of fiber a day. Those are the daily recommended allowances. In some parts of the world, people are eating a lot more than that, actually. But the average American is only getting about 15 grams of fiber a day, sometimes less. And that means that we're starving the gut microbes in our colon of their favorite fuels. Fiber resists digestion and makes it to the colon and can be broken down into really healthy fermentation products by our gut microbes. Which brings me to, the fact that a lot of the best advice we have today didn't require fancy technology. I mean, I think some of this advice, like Michael Pollan suggesting that we don't eat anything your great grandmother wouldn't recognize as food, or here's this World War I era advice about food. Those advice really hold today, that leaning into a plant-based diet can help our health. So my 5 key takeaways are sent out to all of you via email, and I want to give Chef Jess a chance to take over and show us about her cooking. And I welcome questions. Please feel free to add questions into the chat, and we can try to go over them while we're in the middle of this cooking demonstration. And here's our series coming up. And I want to turn it over to Chef Jess, who's going to tell you about how to make easy frozen kefir bark and also the curried lentil pumpkin soup.
Perfect. Oh, hold on, there we go. Okay. And so we are going to, I'm going to share my screen. Oh, I'm going to have you stop sharing first, Katrina. Perfect. I'm going to do this. Perfect. And I think we're good. Yep. Can you hear me? Hopefully everyone can hear me.
Yep.
I'm not. No. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay. So I am going to show the curried lentil soup first. So we have a red lentil soup. And the reason why I chose this was actually because Katrina loves making lentil soup. And so I thought it'd be fun to start the series off with one of her favorite things to make, but with a little variety. So let's get started. Sorry, I'm going to keep switching the screen on you. So I have red lentils. Red lentils are probably the easiest to cook with because they don't need to be soaked and they cook in almost no time. So out of all the lentils, this guy will be the easiest to cook with. Now, one of the things you can do with lentils is you can sprout them. Sprouting them makes it easier to digest. And so red lentils, Katrina's had success sprouting them. Sometimes they'll sprout, sometimes for me they haven't, just because they're split. But what you can do is soak them overnight and then get a jar or a colander with holes. And what you want to do is throw out the water and then keep it at room temperature anywhere from 1 to 5 days, depending on how much sprout you want. And so you'll see those little, the sprout actually start coming up. Makes it easier to digest then, and you can eat them raw that way. And you can put them in salads or you can put them in the soup too. So we're going to add, for this soup, we're going to do garlic, onion, carrot, ginger, and jalapeno. Oh, no, sorry, the jalapeno goes with something else. And so first things first, we're going to grate our ginger. If you want to peel your ginger, you can, but there's actually no need. You can keep it whole and just use the skin then. Sorry, I kept my tools on the wrong side. And so I'm actually going to grate it with the skin. If you don't want to grate it with the skin, you can use a spoon and it'll scrape right off. But as long as you've got good organic ginger, you can use it, just because the soil that it was grown in was probably very healthy. All right. So we've got the ginger and then garlic. We're going to do about 2 cloves of garlic. Again, if you want to do more, you can do more. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to take the heel of the knife and the heel of my hand and push down, then cut the tip off and then roll it right out. I've been using a lot of garlic presses recently too. And so if you want, you could use a garlic press, understanding that the more you chop your garlic, so if you let it go through a garlic press, it's going to be stronger. So if you like the flavor of garlic, remember, mince, mince, mince. And if you don't, just slice it. But garlic has that compound allicin in it that's healthy. And the way that we activate it is by chopping it and setting it aside for anywhere between 5 to 10 minutes for all those healthy compounds to come together. And there's that. Scraping with the back of the knife, not the front, okay? I'm gonna add that with my ginger since it's gonna go in at the same time. Onion, I'm gonna only use half an onion, and you don't have to use a red onion, you can use a regular onion. Red onions will make you cry the most, I find, because they're usually the oldest in the store. So if you want to prevent yourself from crying, use a white onion. The white onions are the ones that don't make you cry. Okay. And then I'm going to take my knife, take off the end, the frilly end. Using the tip of my knife, I'm just going to follow the lines that are already on the onion. So if you ever look at your onion, there's these little lines that you can follow. And then if you want, go in one more time just to get a fine dice. Hold everything together like a claw and then push forward. Now, if you're somebody who doesn't like dicing or chopping onions and the recipe only calls for so much, don't waste this side. Just cut the other half too, especially if you don't like chopping. Now, we're going to add a carrot in here too. And this is an organic carrot. And I've been getting eye rolls from people because I tell them to use the skin. And I understand it's not pretty, but it's where all, if this is an organic carrot, again, that's where all the good soil was and the nutrients from the soil. So use the skin. If you don't want to use the skin, at least peel it and save it and make a vegetable stock out of it, because then you get everything healthy in your veggie stock that you can use, which is what we're going to use for our soup too. And we're going to grate this. One of my tricks to get a lot of vegetables and just a lot of veggies into your soups, stews, anything like that. When you grate it and cook it, you don't see it as much, and you just get the flavors of it, and it makes it feel like you're not really eating that much vegetable, but you really are. So it's one of my things that I did with my kids early on that I advise no one to do, because they don't eat fruits and vegetables now because of it. And so it hides it so you don't taste it, but you are getting all the benefits from it too. All right. And you can get really cool carrots these days. They have the different colors, the tricolor, so you can even get purple carrots. Just make it nice and fun. All right. So while that's going on, I'm going to heat up the stove. And we're going to bloom our curry powder. So I have curry powder, and we have recipes for curry powder. If you ever want one, we can give you one. But you can make your own curry powder. Most curry powder doesn't have salt in it, so don't worry. But we're going to bloom it. In your recipe, I want to advise you that I wrote grapeseed oil. I was a big proponent of grapeseed oil when I was writing these recipes. Grapeseed oil is high in omega-6, and so if you're trying to balance things, grapeseed oil might be one that you might not want to use as much of. I would still need you to use a high smoking point oil. So avocado oil would work, or an expeller pressed canola oil. Omega-6 still though. So expeller pressed canola oil is different than regular canola oil, because canola oil is usually made by adding a chemical. Expeller pressed canola oil is actually pressed. So it's cold pressed, it's not heated. And so you get more of the healthy benefits from it. And it's not a chemical that was added to get it then. So we're going to heat the oil up, get it nice and hot, and we're going to bloom our curry powder. And all that means is we're going to cook it until it's aromatic. So if you think about it, all those spices had a little bit of oil in them. And so what we're trying to do is wake up all that smell, all those flavors. If you put it into just hot water, it tends to just clump and it doesn't spread the flavor as well. The oil here becomes a carrier for the flavors that are in that curry powder. So think about it that way, and why you do need a little bit of oil to help get that flavor going. Okay. So I'm going to keep grating. So another one you can grate, I love grating and putting into soups, is zucchini. Zucchini is a great one too. And really just any kind of vegetable you have lying around your house can go into the soup, because at the end we're going to blend it. And that's it. All right. So while that's heating up, I'm going to talk about the other portion of this recipe. We're going to create a really, really pretty oil that we're going to add into some cashew yogurt. So if you've never had cashew yogurt, I thought I would show you. It's thicker. It's different. It has a different consistency than regular yogurt, but it still has that nice creaminess. So we're going to make like an oil to go into that yogurt to put on top of the soup. So we have just cold oil here. I'm going to put annatto seeds. And a lot of people will be like, what are annatto seeds? If you ever look at the ingredients for cheddar cheese, you'll see annatto seeds. Annatto seeds are actually a healthy way of coloring food. It turns food like an orangey color, or an orangey hue kind of. And so it's used to actually color things, as well as provide kind of like a peppery taste. We've got cumin seeds as well, and then a little bit of turmeric. I put it all in, and then I turn on my stove, okay? And all I'm going to do is cook it until I start seeing the little cumin seeds sizzle. So now that's nice and heated. It's smoking. So as soon as you start seeing it smoke, you can add all your other ingredients inside. This is a time when a lot of people, when you're stir frying or cooking something like this, you want to add more oil. Don't add more oil. You're going to add veggie stock. Instead of adding oil, add water or veggie stock, and it'll help it start cooking down more. You don't need to add more oil because there's no real reason for it. You can start going in there because all you're trying to do right now is soften up your veggies. You don't need to caramelize them or anything. You just need to soften them. And then I'm going to add my lentils. So unsoaked, you can buy Trader Joe's. Red lentils are probably one of the easier ones to find. And then we're going to add this. We're going to add fire roasted diced tomatoes. You can use any kind. You can use regular diced tomatoes too if you want. It doesn't have to be fire roasted. And then the fun stuff, pumpkin. So around this time of year, we tend to buy a lot of pumpkin, and we don't always use the whole jar. And so I have a ton of pumpkin recipes because canned 100% pumpkin is really, really good for you. And if you have a little bit lying around, add it into your soups or stews, and it ends up acting as a thickener and a sweetener for your dishes. It's not overpowering. It doesn't taste like pumpkin pie. It doesn't do any of that. Rather, it just adds that extra depth of flavor in sweetness that you don't usually get from stuff. So I'm going to add my stock in now. So veggie stock. And then we're just going to let that simmer. About 20 minutes. 15, 20 minutes until those lentils are nice and soft. And that's it. So after that's done, this is what it looks like. Ah, the power of TV. No. So nice and thick, right? It's reduced. If I cook it without the lid on, it will reduce even more. So if you want to make sure that you are left with like a nice soupy soup, put a lid on it. If you want a thicker soup, cook it without the lid then. So it's really up to you which way you like it. If you want it to be a little bit thicker or thinner. And then we're going to use an emulsion blender and blend it. So I'm going to come over here. So you could even add spinach in here. You could add a whole bunch of different types of veggies. And the soup freezes really, really well too. And no, you don't need to grate the carrot if you don't want to grate the carrot. A lot of people will ask that. You don't need to grate it. It's, again, one of those other things that you might just have lying around the house, a grated carrot for whatever reason, and you can add it in there then. So this is done now. The oil it's sizzling. So you see the little cumin seeds sizzling. You see the annatto seeds sizzling. The one ingredient that's missing in there, the most important thing. Remember, when we add turmeric to get the compounds of it, you want to make sure you add a little bit of black pepper. That's the magic combination. Okay. Now I'm going to take this oil. I've got my yogurt right here. And I'm just going to strain the oil right in there. And then give it a good mix. So we'll serve this on top of the soup. Gives it just another layer of flavor, both creaminess and flavor, the yogurt kind of that tanginess. And then the peppery annatto with the turmeric and the pepper inside. So just like that. All right. I'll make a bowl so that you can see. And you would just dollop, just like that. And let's move on to the next one. All right, bark. This is probably the easiest thing you'll ever make in your life. Probably, maybe. So we all know what chocolate bark is. Bark is like usually chocolate, sometimes white chocolate, sometimes dark chocolate, and all it is melted chocolate, and then you just put stuff on top of it. So this is a play on that, only we're using kefir. I hope I said that right. Katrina, did I say kefir right? I hope I did.
That's how I say it too. I say
it is.
Yeah.
Okay, so kefir is really, really interesting because it's completely different than yogurt. It is a different creature. Kefir is made with bacteria and yeast versus yogurt, which is just bacteria. Kefir also has like a grain that's used to activate it, or it's kind of like the starter. It's called a grain. It's not a grain. It's just because it looks like it that they call it that. It's fermented for longer. So technically there is a higher count in probiotics. Is that correct, Katrina?
Yeah, there's a high dose of healthy microbes. But one nuance that I think is fascinating is that we don't see that the microbes in fermented foods like kefir or yogurt or pick your favorite kimchi, those microbes don't colonize and become resident in our gut. It's more that they pass through, but they bring with them beautiful, healthy molecules that promote the other bugs you want in your gut to be growing. So we see an increase in diversity, but not from the bugs in the probiotic itself.
That makes sense. And so when you buy kefir, a lot of people will ask where to buy it. It's really interesting because we have such a large Middle Eastern culture around here. You find a lot of kefir. And when I said one of the things that's inside of it is yeast. And so you'll find sometimes kefir drinks that have actually a little fizz to it. And it's that activation of the yeast that's inside of it that creates that CO2 then. So it's usually thinner. It's more like a drink. Trader Joe's actually has it, and you can find it flavored. And so, yes, we would be tempted to buy it flavored with mango, strawberry. Just watch for the sugar content on it, as well as if there's any other additives they're adding. I don't believe the one at Trader Joe's has anything else, so it should be okay. But this one, there's nothing else but the cultured low-fat milk and then the other things that make it the kefir. So I'm going to add date syrup, though. So if you haven't seen me talk about date syrup, I'm a big proponent of date syrup now, just because it's a cool sweetener to use. It's different. It's still a sweetener, so it's not that it's not, okay? It's still sweet. So you still don't want to use it an excessive amount of it, but I'm using about 3 tablespoons. And that's what's going to sweeten everything for me. Now, what else can I use to sweeten it? You can add a little bit of cinnamon. Cinnamon would work too. But what we're going to do is we're going to do something fun, and we're going to add coconut. So I'm going to stir this around. And you're going to grab yourself a tray, and you're just going to pour it out. Okay, I'll show you what I'm going to do with the other half. Then I'm going to take coconut flakes, unsweetened coconut flakes. Scatter those on top. You can do granola. If you want a really good granola recipe, email us. I will give you one that uses applesauce. And for some reason, it crisps up. Don't ask me why, but it really works. And it's an amazing, amazing recipe. Okay, and then I'm going to add strawberries. So I want to show you something fun. So one of the things that we don't have around here a lot these days are straws because of the whole straw controversy and everything. If you do have a straw, though, what you can do is go the opposite way. So this is where it grows. This is where it's picked, right? If you go from the bottom here, you can actually push the stem right out with a straw. So you go in through this end with a straw, and the stem will pop right out. For this though, since I don't have one, I'll just slice and dice. And so you can use any kind of berries you have lying around. It doesn't even have to be berries. It can be any kind of fruit, can be frozen fruit. Again, a great way to use up what you have at home. And just a rough chop is good. Okay, and I already have one made, so don't worry. Or you could take it to the next level, and you could do individual ones too. So you could do individual kind of frozen yogurt bites with the kefir. So you would do that. You could add a little bit and use the silicone molds. They're really great for things like this. And then you could even just do a quarter of a strawberry and pop them in just like that. And then top it with a little bit more. And again, a great treat to have, and you really do feel like you're having ice cream. So give me 1 sec to grab what I have made. So this was in the freezer last night. I can now take it, and all I have to do is break it apart like that. And then you've got these beautiful chunks of bark that you can eat just like that. So you could eat it just like that, or you could put it in a bowl, put more granola on top of it. Then you've got a nice little kefir bark ready to go. Any questions? No open questions. Nice.
Well, actually, I've been answering them, but we can
cool.
discuss them
Go.
too.
Yeah.
So yeah, some of them I don't know the answer, which is awesome. Like someone just asked me if there are gut bugs that can produce a particular vitamin K. I mean, the thing about microbes is that they are very creative metabolically. Like bottom of the ocean, no problem. They will find something to eat. So I would not be surprised if microbes can produce that, but I'll look into it, you know. It's a cool question. I got questions about whether we're going to go into further detail about fecal transplants and fiber for promoting healthy microbiomes. And we've got a whole year of seminars coming up. So that's nice to hear that people are interested in that. We're actually at the epicenter of a company that's collecting donor samples for the use in fecal transplants here. Ceres Therapeutics is based in Tustin. And so, yeah, I'd be happy to highlight that in the future. Let's see. Let me see if there's other questions we could discuss.
I'm sure there'll be more questions as they come. Yay. Cool.
Exactly. One person.
I want to thank everyone too for coming today too.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think those are both really great recipes, both because of their speed, but also because of their accessibility. You know, lentils are not expensive. I mean, those lentils probably cost $3 or something like that.
Yeah.
And you can make such a feast with them.
Yes. And can you touch on any of the protein that people might be worried about if they're drinking something like this and they're worried they're not getting any meat in their diet then?
Yeah. That's a really good point. I mean, lentils really are a superfood. They're very high in protein, and they're very high in fiber. And they're actually very high in other minerals and vitamins. But yeah, as you might know, there's entire continents of people who are sustained by diets based on lentils and rice. And together, lentils and rice will provide you with all of the amino acids that you need. And you actually don't even need to eat them at the same time in the same meal, as long as you eat them, you know, roughly the same day or days or week. You're going to get all the nutrients that you need that way. So yeah, lentils are really amazing that way.
Perfect. Well, thank you everyone, and we'll see you next month. Thank you for coming.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.